Hello guys, Yusaku here, and welcome to my Yugioh Vrains Episode 7 review. Now, this episode, before getting into anything else, I gotta say, there was a lot to keep track of, and a lot of that's because the duel was super fast-paced, but just as a whole, if we're equating this to, like, food, this isn't a 3-course meal, this is like a 4 or 5-course meal, and then there was a lot of plot-heavy stuff starting to happen towards the end, which is leading into the next episode strongly, but we'll get to all of that. So let's go ahead and start off with just the character interactions between Aoi and Yusaku as they're dueling and what it indicates with each of their characters. So one thing I think that's really good about this so far is Aoi clearly has a fairly fleshed out deck archetype at the moment already with her Trickstars. We saw a lot of combos being played, we saw several cards in action, and we're just entering Vrains, and we've already seen her play a number of cards. We know she'll probably get plenty more as long as she continues to duel. I think that's a really good indication for any character in Yu-Gi-Oh! That if they have an archetype that has a fair amount of cards that are fairly popular. I've heard a lot of people saying on the internet that the Trickstars are super powerful with their chain burn combos, which they do seem fairly powerful from the anime, but that doesn't always transfer over. I'm not super familiar with them yet. I'm still playing in Pendulum format, but still, that does impact the relevance of a character. Look at what happened with Crow in 5Ds. Oh, he'll be the main villain. Wait, you're telling me Blackwings sell really well? Screw that. We need to make him a main character. Forget about Aoi and the younger twins. We don't need them anymore. Crow's selling cards! Which means if these Trickstars are selling well, we've got a better chance of seeing Aoi play a dominant role within the show, and the fact that she has an archetype at least gives her a shot to do that. Previous characters really didn't. Harpy Ladies were pretty much useless from Mai. Taya didn't have an archetype. Alexis's Cyber Angels weren't released until last year. Aoi didn't really have an archetype, and Black Rose is mainly just used as a field nuke, especially nowadays, if it's used at all. And then Arc 5, we got two fairly well fleshed out archetypes in the Lunalights and the Melodious monsters, respectively, and the other two were kind of underwhelming in that they each only had like 4 cards or so. So, I mean, if we're looking at history, cards and the role a character plays, very well linked. I mean, especially with female characters. In Arc 5, Yuzu and Serena are probably two of the best written females Yu-Gi-Oh's ever had, and they did have full archetypes. So I think that shows some promise for Aoi, at least having the potential at this point to be that female lead it seems all of us in the fandom have been looking for from Yu-Gi-Oh! For quite some time now. Will they deliver? Their record doesn't say so, but we'll see. I also think that Aoi's cards being inherently fairly strong, at least from what I've heard of the testing and from what we've seen in the episode, indicates that she's probably a pretty competent duelist, which I think is also a good sign for her character. I mean, in a show based around children's card games, where rather than having combat and everything else, you solve all your problems with the children's card game, you have to be pretty good at the card game in order to stay relevant to solving the plot and being a catalyst in any way, shape, or form to it. And that was an issue we saw a lot of our other female characters struggle with as well. They had a couple early wins, and then they kind of faltered out. So let's hope Aoi's deck is strong enough to keep her in play, especially considering none of the other female leads decks have ever really been meta, except for Cyber Angels super briefly. And even at that point, only kind of, because it was so short-lived, and I don't even know if they ever ended up, like, seeing major play, or it was more so people were like, hey, this is really strong, and then it never went anywhere. I'm not the best at keeping up with the competitive card game stuff all the time. But anyway, moving past all of the stuff about their decks and whatnot, I thought this was a fairly entertaining duel to watch. Like I said, it was kind of hard to keep track of, which I think at times detracted from it. The one thing that really did stand out to me is they're starting to cut down on the amount of time it takes to show those link summoning animations, which, thank freaking God. Sometimes during the Go duel, when they had multiple chain links, like when Yusaku did those like 3 link summons back to back to back, it was like, okay, just get to the point. We've seen this, put things in the grid, and then see the arrows light up, and then your monster pops out and everything else enough times. I'm glad that they're starting to speed that up a bit. And speaking of link summoning, why did Aoi fall for the same trick that Go did, in that Yusaku's gonna let his life points fall below 1,000, generate a card using his I'm the main character, I can do whatever I want powers, and then win the duel, considering I find it highly unlikely she didn't see that duel herself between him and Go, considering it was broadcasted in some way, shape, or form, considering the kids were watching it, and she seems to have this thing about following Playmaker because he's stealing her attention and everything else. So I'm surprised she fell for the same tactic. I hope that's not an indication that she's going to receive kind of poor writing It certainly is a possibility, or it could just be the writers were kind of hoping we'd glance over that, because it is a fairly minor detail. I won't hound the episode by any means on that. It's not super dramatic, but she did seem surprised when, oh, Playmaker, I've been playing into his hands this whole time, when she realized his life points were below 1,000 and he'd activate his skill. So that was slightly disappointing, but not a huge deal in my mind. Overall, I still really enjoyed the episode. In terms of the interactions between the two characters, I like the way that they were, shaving off a little bit of Yusaku's edge and showing his care towards people. They did it a little bit with Go and him talking about how he doesn't want to bring him in and endanger him on this mission to fight Hanoi, and how he actually enjoyed the duel against Go, which was already progress from episode 1. And then I like the way they handle it with Aoi. He's genuinely super angry with Hanoi for using someone innocent like her to try and combat him when he believes the fight is between those two. At least that's the impression I get from seeing the looks on his face. And for those who like to ride the shipping train and put these two together, you could definitely make a case for that as well. Especially given towards the end of the duel, there's a real sense of drama as Yusaku tries to end it as quickly as possible before Hanoi literally damages her brain with this berserk mode, as AI is warning him, if this goes on any longer and she gets pushed any further, she could have permanent brain damage. And he's definitely starting to kick on the gas, at least as much as you can with using your attack chance and stuff in the show. And that brings us to what I believe to be the most interesting part of the episode by far, and that's when we just see Aoi falling at the end. Now, before that, we saw this montage of her falling, and I think that was supposed to be taking place in her head as she was losing control to Revolver's mind control techniques or whatever that were done through the Dark Angel card, as he said, it's over now, I have full control over you, you can't resist anymore, or something along those lines. And then we started to see the falling montage. It seemed like, once more, that was meant to indicate she was losing control of herself, but by the end of the episode, she's literally falling off of her hoverboard, and it's rather concerning. I mean, the music had been dead at that point for about 30 or 40 seconds, I would say, and the episode, as Yusaku called his last attack, and things seemed to be slowing down to that last minute, and that was incredibly well done. It's one of the most dramatic moments I've seen in Yu-Gi-Oh! In a long time. The cut of the music really made it, especially considering Vrains has made super heavy use of its soundtrack so far, and it sold us on the fact that this is already getting really serious. We're only 7 episodes in, but we've already watched several of our main characters come extremely close to death, and we don't know the condition Aoi's going to be in, and we don't know what any of this implies for Yusaku either. After all, to the general public's knowledge, they probably didn't understand any of what was going on with that Knight of Hanoi card, and Yusaku, being who he is, won't try and explain to the public, not that I necessarily think they would believe him anyway, so there's certainly a chance he could get blamed for what happened to Aoi in his Playmaker form, and then his likability goes down, he starts getting hunted by others. It's certainly possible Akira may even blame him, it's hard to say, I don't know how aware he is of the Hanoi stuff, but it's possible Akira may blame him and go after him. At which rate, Yusaku is suddenly public enemy number 1. It sort of reminds me of when we had the whole Yusei escaping from prison arc in the beginning of Yu-Gi-Oh! 5Ds. At least that's one way that this show could now go. And there's general concern for Aoi. I just hope she doesn't end up being in a coma for a while and ending up being a damsel in distress. And running with that, this is probably going to leave her injured in some way, so I'd say there's a pretty good chance she might end up in a hospital. At which rate, it's kind of beginning to resemble the Yusei and Aki thing, where she was in the hospital, he came to talk to her. I don't think it'll be quite as violent as that, because Aoi doesn't seem afraid of herself the way Aki was. But I'm seeing continued 5Ds parallels, the potential for like something similar to the Yusei and prison arc, something similar to him saving Aki. And then there was also, I noticed in this episode, though other people probably noticed it a lot before me, considering I think he's been doing this the whole time, when Yusaku does his chants for the Link summons, he says, open the door to the future, or something along those lines, which is very similar to what Yusei used to say when he was synchro summoning. He used to constantly talk about the future, and then the bright future, and something along those lines, at least as long as my memory serves me correctly. So the idea of this sort of being a 5Ds reboot certainly isn't falling short in a lot of ways. I loved the ending of this episode, and I'm really curious what you guys thought about, where is this going down below. Obviously, episode 8 is already out by now, and I'll be watching that soon. But still, I stopped to make this video and just taking the drama. It's a well-executed ending, and it's one of the best cliffhangers I've seen done in Yu-Gi-Oh! In my opinion. Be sure to let me know your thoughts down below. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to like and subscribe. If not, constructive criticism is always welcome. I honestly do appreciate it. Thanks for tuning in, guys, and have a nice day.